It felt like the very air was a furnace, baking the land, scorching every living thing. The sky above our little corner of rural Texas hadn't shed a tear in what felt like an eternity, the sun a malevolent eye searing the earth, turning once verdant, fields into cracked, dusty scars. The local creek, usually a lively murmur, was nothing more than a parched vein of cracked mud, its pebbles gleaming like forgotten teeth. This wasn't just a bad season. This was the kind of drought that rewrote history books, a silent, creeping apocalypse that stole the life from everything it touched. My property, a sprawling 100 acres of what used to be a working ranch with its own well and a surprisingly resilient natural spring, was one of the few places left with a reliable water source. The news channels screamed about water rationing, about towns losing their supply, about the federal government declaring disaster zones across the state. My heart ached seeing the desperate faces on the television, knowing the suffering unfolding just miles from my doorstep. I'd always believed in helping those in need, a philosophy instilled by my late grandfather who'd built this ranch from nothing. It was his land, his legacy, and I knew what he would have done. So I made the call. A phone conversation with FEMA that started hesitantly quickly turned into a flurry of activity. My property, with its secure perimeter, existing structures, and, most importantly, its active water sources, was designated a critical FEMA Disaster Relief Hub. Within days, the quiet hum of the ranch was replaced by the constant thrum of generators, the steady arrival of trucks laden with supplies, and the chatter of hundreds of weary, desperate souls. Tents sprang up like mushrooms after rare rain, transforming my familiar fields into a temporary city of resilience. Aid workers, volunteers, and displaced families poured in, their faces etched with relief at the sight of fresh water and shelter. I walked among them, offering what comfort I could, directing traffic, and overseeing the distribution of vital resources. It was exhausting, overwhelming, but deeply fulfilling work. We were making a difference. Amidst the organized chaos, I started noticing her. She wasn't part of any official FEMA team, nor was she one of the displaced families I'd registered. She was just there. A woman with piercing, almost unnervingly still blue eyes and a quiet demeanor that made her blend into the background, yet stand out at the same time. She'd often be near the main water distribution points, observing, her gaze lingering a little too long on the pipes leading to the reservoirs, or the pumps chugging away. I'd seen her before, years ago perhaps, a fleeting face at a local fair, but I couldn't quite place her. Her name, if I ever knew it, escaped me. When I tried to strike up a conversation, she offered only curt, almost dismissive replies, her gaze always shifting away, scanning the landscape. It was unsettling. I dismissed it as stress, as her own personal grief from the drought, but a tiny, insistent voice in the back of my mind whispered caution. One evening, after the last of the trucks had departed and the camp had settled into a fitful sleep, I was doing a final perimeter check. The air was thick with the scent of dust and desperation. As I approached the main well house, a shadow detached itself from the side of the building. It was her. She moved quickly, silently, slipping away into the darkness before I could call out, leaving behind a faint metallic tang in the air that was utterly out of place. A shiver ran down my spine, a premonition of something terribly wrong. The initial weeks of the FEMA Disaster Relief Hub were a blur of coordinated chaos, a relentless, exhausting symphony of human need and tireless effort. Every dawn brought fresh waves of weary travelers, their vehicles caked in dust, their faces etched with the harsh realities of the drought. We registered families, allocated tents, and guided them to the food and medical stations, but the constant, gnawing worry was always water. My once abundant well, supplemented by the spring, was now pumping almost ceaselessly, the machinery groaning under the strain. The flow, once robust, had thinned, a direct consequence of the regional water table plummeting. Even the usually Reliable, natural spring. My grandfather's pride seemed to weep rather than flow, its trickle barely enough to keep the auxiliary tanks topped up. Every gallon distributed felt precious, a literal lifeline in a land starved of moisture. The smiles of gratitude from those receiving their daily ration were heartbreaking and motivating in equal measure. The first few days were a testament to human resilience. People adapted, sharing what little they had, finding camaraderie in shared adversity. But as the weeks bled into one another and the merciless sun continued its assault, a new tension began to fray the edges of our fragile community. Whispers started, quiet at first, then growing louder, about the diminishing water supply. "The tanks aren't refilling as fast as they should," one volunteer murmured, eyeing the level gauge on the main reservoir with a frown. I'd attributed it to increased consumption, the sheer volume of people reliant on our limited resources. We tightened rationing, urged stricter conservation, but the numbers didn't lie. The main reservoir, designed to hold enough water for days, was dropping at an alarming rate, faster than our pumps could replenish it, even running 24 hours a day. It was mathematically impossible given our current distribution rates. Then came the equipment issues. A valve on one of the smaller but critical feeder lines to the purification system suddenly malfunctioned, jamming in a partially closed position. It took hours for our small team of mechanics to fix it, costing us valuable processing time. A few days later, a critical pressure sensor on the main pump began giving erratic readings, causing the system to frequently shut down as a safety measure. Each incident, on its own, could be explained away by the heavy workload and the age of some of the infrastructure. But collectively, they started to paint a disturbing picture. A cold dread began to settle in my stomach, a feeling that went beyond the stress of the drought. During these increasingly tense days, I found myself watching her more intently. The woman with the unsettling blue eyes. She was still a phantom, never engaging directly, but her presence felt more pronounced, almost a shadow lingering at the periphery of every water-related problem. I saw her observing the mechanics working on the jammed valve, her face impassive. Later, I caught a glimpse of her near the main reservoir, her back to me, just before the pressure sensor incident was reported. She seemed to appear and disappear, a ghost in the machine. One afternoon, while explaining the dire water situation to a group of concerned residents, her gaze fixed on me from across the crowd, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Not anger, not sympathy, but an almost clinical assessment. It was like she was studying my reaction, measuring the impact of the crisis. When I met her gaze, she merely turned and walked away, melting into the throngs of people. The panic in the hub escalated. Arguments erupted over water rations. Children cried from thirst. Relief workers, once idealistic, now looked haggard and defeated. We were failing, and I couldn't understand why. We had enough capacity, theoretically. Was it leakage? Was it simply the drought finally overpowering even my robust system? I spent sleepless nights poring over blueprints, checking pipes, monitoring every gauge. The numbers still didn't add up. The horrifying truth revealed itself on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon. I was with Miguel, one of my most trusted volunteers, a former plumber, inspecting the main underground pipeline that ran from the well to the primary filtration unit. We'd noticed a consistent, almost imperceptible drop in pressure at the far end of the line. We suspected a small leak, perhaps from earth shifts caused by the dry ground. Following the pipe's path, we arrived at a rarely used access hatch, almost overgrown with withered brush. Miguel, grumbling about neglected maintenance, forced it open. The air that rushed out was stale, metallic. We lowered ourselves into the cramped, dark space, illuminated only by our flashlights. And then we saw it. Not a leak. Not a malfunction. Someone had deliberately, meticulously cut a section of the main supply line. Not fully, but enough to cause a slow, steady hemorrhage of our precious water directly into the parched earth below. The cut was precise, almost surgical, and then crudely patched with a temporary ineffective seal designed to fail slowly and invisibly. It was an act of calculated malice, a deliberate sabotage. The water we thought we were losing to the drought was, in fact, being stolen, wasted intentionally. Miguel gasped, his flashlight beam trembling over the shocking evidence. "Someone did this," he whispered, his voice laced with disbelief and fury. The culprit was still unknown, but the motive, the sheer, cold-blooded intent, was now horrifyingly clear. This wasn't a natural disaster anymore. This was personal. The discovery of the sabotaged pipeline ripped through me, replacing exhaustion with a cold, righteous fury. This wasn't a drought anymore. It was a crime, a deliberate act of cruelty against hundreds of desperate people. The fear that had been a dull ache now sharpened into a piercing certainty. I had a saboteur on my hands, hiding in plain sight within the very hub I'd created. My investigation began immediately, a desperate, solitary hunt amidst the relentless demands of the relief effort. Every spare moment was dedicated to it. While Miguel and his team worked frantically to repair the damaged pipe and reinforce other vulnerable points, I started patrolling the property, not just as the benevolent host, but as a silent, watchful detective. My first lead came from the most unlikely source, a faint, almost invisible footprint near the repatched section of pipe. It wasn't the heavy, industrial boot print of a FEMA worker or volunteer. This was smaller, more delicate, hinting at a specialized kind of footwear, perhaps for gardening or light hiking. I meticulously photographed it, comparing it to the myriad of prints around the hub, but it was unique. I started observing people's shoes, subtly as I moved through the camp. The challenge was immense. With hundreds of people, how could I narrow it down? The next clue surfaced near the main reservoir where the pressure sensor had malfunctioned. Tucked beneath a loose stone, almost as if deliberately hidden but carelessly left, was a small, ornate silver locket. It was tarnished and old, clearly a personal item, not something belonging to any of the relief supplies. I held it in my palm, its cold weight feeling heavy with significance. It didn't open. No engraving was visible. Just the distinct, intricate pattern of intertwining vines. I discreetly showed it to a few long-term volunteers, asking if they recognized it, but no one did. The locket became a constant, burning question in my pocket. The dangers of investigating became apparent quickly. The stress of the water crisis was making people desperate and volatile. Accusations flew freely among residents about water hoarders, leading to heated arguments. My quiet inquiries were often met with suspicion. I couldn't openly reveal the sabotage. Panic would surely erupt, possibly leading to vigilantism. So I operated in the shadows, patching pipes by day and hunting for a saboteur by night. The lack of sleep began to take its toll, my temper shortening, my patience fraying. I was stretched thin, trying to manage a failing water supply while simultaneously hunting a ghost. My suspicion, which had been a whisper, began to solidify around her. The woman with the piercing blue eyes. Her movements were always too deliberate, too observant. She was never truly idle, always watching. I noticed her near the well house more than once, long after everyone else had retreated. One afternoon, I saw her sketching, sitting alone beneath a dying mesquite tree. Her drawing was of the main water tower, rendered with an almost obsessive detail, every pipe and valve meticulously outlined. It was an unusual subject for an amateur artist. The final piece of information came from an older volunteer named Clara, a sweet but sharp-eyed woman who helped with laundry. That quiet woman, the one with the pale eyes, Clara murmured one evening as I passed. She always wears those strange boots. Not hiking boots, but those thick-soled gardening ones. and her hair is always perfectly neat, even in this dust. Gardening boots. The footprint. A sickening chill spread through me. Armed with this escalating evidence, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The water levels were critical, the panic growing. I had to confront her. I tracked her movements for hours, waiting for an opportune moment when she was isolated. It came late one evening. She was walking alone towards the edge of the property, away from the bustling hub, near a dilapidated old shed that had once housed farming equipment. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows. "We need to talk," I called out, my voice cutting through the quiet. She stopped, slowly turning to face me. Her blue eyes, even in the dim light, held no surprise, no fear, only that unsettling stillness. "About what?" she asked, her voice calm, almost detached. "About the water," I stated, stepping closer, my hand clenching the silver locket in my pocket. "About the sabotaged pipeline, about the faulty sensor, about the exact kind of cut that wouldn't cause an immediate rupture but a slow, invisible bleed." I pulled out the locket, and about this. Found it near the reservoir. Her gaze dropped to the locket, and for the first time, a flicker of something, recognition, regret, crossed her face, quickly veiled. "You've been investigating," she said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "I knew you would." "Why?" I demanded, my voice raw with exhaustion and frustration. "Why would you do this? We're trying to save lives here. People are dying of thirst because of you." She took a slow, deliberate step towards me, her gaze piercing mine. "Dying of thirst," she repeated, her voice laced with an unexpected bitterness. "That's ironic, isn't it? You, playing the hero, providing water." She paused, her eyes narrowing, a profound pain surfacing in their depths. "Because this property, this very land you're standing on, was once mine." My breath hitched. "What are you talking about? This land has been in my family for generations." "Not all of it," she countered, her voice rising slightly, her composure cracking. "Not the part where your spring is, not the part where you built that well. My family lost it, piece by agonizing piece, to your grandfather's generosity during the last great drought decades ago. He bought it for pennies, when we had nothing left, no water, no crops. He took it, and he did it all perfectly legally, of course, under the guise of helping." Her voice cracked with a fierce, decades-old resentment. "My great-grandmother died of dehydration just after we lost this land. My family was ruined. My name is Alara Vance. And I came back to make you feel just a fraction of the desperation my family felt, trapped on land that was ours, watching it dry up, while yours flourished." Her eyes, once still, now burned with a chilling, historical rage. "You wanted to be a hero? You wanted to build a hub? I just expedited what was already happening. The land always remembers." Her revelation hit me like a physical blow. Not just sabotage, but an ancient, festering wound, a twisted act of vengeance for a perceived historical injustice. But her explanation also raised a storm of new, terrifying questions. Was her family's story truly accurate? How much of this was fact? How much bitter memory? And if she believed she was righting an old wrong, what else was she capable of? The crisis had just become infinitely more complex. Alara Vance's words hung in the air, a venomous echo of a past I never knew, shattering my understanding of the crisis. This wasn't just sabotage, it was a deeply personal vendetta, fueled by generations of perceived injustice. The immediate aftermath of our confrontation was a dizzying mix of shock and desperate practicality. I couldn't just arrest her. What would that do to the already fragile morale of the hub? How would I explain her actions without sparking chaos or a dangerous rift? More importantly, if her story held any truth, it meant the problem was deeper, more entrenched than just a lone saboteur, I escorted Alara back to a secluded, unused part of the ranch, away from the watchful eyes of the camp. We talked for hours through the night under the harsh glare of a single utility light. Her story, delivered with a chilling blend of raw, pain, and bitter conviction, began to paint a picture of a family systematically dispossessed. She spoke of her great-grandparents, hard-working farmers who lost their land during the last great drought of the 1930s. Not just any land, but the very parcel containing the resilient spring that now fed my well, the very source vital to the FEMA hub. My grandfather, she claimed, had swooped in, offering a pittance, a lifeline that was effectively a death sentence for her family. He bought it legally, yes, but leveraged their desperation, building his empire on their ruin. Alara wasn't just sabotaging my water supply, she was trying to reclaim what she believed was hers, forcing me to experience the thirst her ancestors had endured. "I didn't want to kill anyone," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Just make you understand. To make this land remember what was taken." Her revelation, however, wasn't the deepest cut. As she spoke, she revealed something far more unsettling. She hadn't acted entirely alone. She had been encouraged, as she put it, by a small, secretive online group, a community of individuals who shared similar historical grievances against powerful families and corporations they believed had exploited natural disasters for profit. They called themselves the land's memory keepers. They shared research, strategies, and even financial support. Alara was not just driven by personal vengeance. She was a symptom of a larger, unseen movement, one that saw the FEMA hub not as an act of charity, but as another form of appropriation, another opportunity for the powerful to consolidate control. She'd been fed distorted truths, manipulated by a collective grievance. This was the new, far more complex problem. It wasn't just Alara, it was a potentially widespread, invisible threat. The immediate impact on the water situation was catastrophic. While we talked, the slow bleed from the patched pipe had continued. And now, with our focus diverted by the confrontation, another vital section of the main filtration manifold had been compromised. Not cut, but intentionally clogged with a thick, viscous substance. A quick, desperate act by Alara before I'd cornered her, designed to be a final, crippling blow. By dawn, the primary water distribution points ran dry. The reserve tanks were critically low, showing mere hours of supply remaining for hundreds of people. The panic that had been simmering now boiled over. News of the complete water outage spread like wildfire through the camp. Cries of despair, shouts of frustration, and even angry accusations filled the air. Mothers clutched dehydrated children. Aid workers looked on in stunned helplessness. We were failing. The hub, once a beacon of hope, was on the brink of collapse. My race against time began in earnest. I had Alara, confined but cooperating, her initial fervor giving way to a strange, almost weary resignation. She knew about the clog. "It's a resin," she stated flatly, "designed to expand with water. You won't be able to just flush it." My technical team, led by a grim-faced Miguel, worked feverishly on the filtration unit. But the resin was insidious, adhering to the pipe walls, making it impossible to clear without dismantling the entire system. A process that would take days. Days we simply didn't have. Every minute counted. People were becoming gravely ill. The medical tent was overflowing. We explored every alternative solution. Drilling a new well was out of the question. The water table was too low, and we lacked the heavy machinery. Transporting water in by truck was an option, but the nearest source was hundreds of miles away, and the roads were barely passable. FEMA was trying, but they were stretched thin across multiple disaster zones. I rallied my core volunteers, explaining the full gravity of the situation, not the sabotage, but the complete system failure. We needed a new plan, something radical. My mind kept returning to my grandfather's old, handwritten journals, tucked away in the ranch study. He was an ingenious man, deeply connected to the land. I remembered vague references to a secondary collection system, a hidden network of ancient, rudimentary channels designed to capture scarce rainfall or underground seepage. A desperate long shot, but our only shot. While Miguel and his team continued their futile efforts on the filtration system, I grabbed the journals and, with a few volunteers, set out. The sun beat down mercilessly, every step stirring up clouds of choking dust. We searched for hours, following cryptic clues and faded maps. Finally, behind a dense, overgrown thicket of dried-out scrub oak, we found it, a series of hand-dug trenches leading to a small, almost forgotten underground cistern. It was barely a trickle, but there was water. Murky, certainly not potable, but water nonetheless. The next challenge was purification. Our advanced filtration system was out of commission. We had basic filters, but not enough for the sheer volume needed. That night, as the last of the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in desperate shades of orange and purple, the sounds of coughing and labored breathing from the camp grew louder. The last sips of clean water were distributed, and the hushed silence that followed was heavy with dread. I stood by the empty water tanks, looking out at the silent, desperate rows of tents. Children lay listless in their parents' arms. The air shimmered with the heat, but a colder, more profound chill settled in my bones. We had failed. The FEMA Hub, my dream of help and sanctuary, was on the verge of becoming a graveyard. The hidden cistern, our last hope, offered barely enough to sustain us for hours, not days, and required purification methods we couldn't scale. The new, overwhelming challenge loomed: how to get enough purified water to hundreds of dying people when every modern system had failed, and an ancient, barely functioning trickle was all we had left. The community was at its absolute lowest point, teetering on the brink of complete, irreversible failure. The silence that fell over the FEMA Hub that night was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard. The last trickles of clean water were gone. Children cried softly from thirst. Despair, thick and suffocating, hung in the air. The hidden cistern, my grandfather's forgotten ingenuity, was our only hope, but its murky contents were undrinkable, without purification. Our modern systems were choked by Alara's resin, irrevocably damaged. It was the absolute lowest point, the brink of total failure. But desperation breeds invention. I stared at the faint glow from the medical tent, at the faces of people I had vowed to protect. My grandfather's journals became my new Bible. He wrote about a forgotten, rudimentary purification method he'd learned from indigenous communities. A slow, multi-stage filtration system using layers of sand, charcoal, and crushed rock, followed by prolonged exposure to sunlight in clear containers to kill remaining bacteria. It was ancient, inefficient, but it was all we had. I gathered Miguel and the remaining able-bodied volunteers. "We're going old school," I told them, my voice raspy but determined. We worked through the night, a desperate, tireless brigade. Using every available shovel, bucket, and sheet, we began constructing rudimentary filtration pits, lining them with tarps and filling them with layers of scavenged sand from the dry creek beds, charcoal from burnt mesquite, and crushed rocks, painstakingly broken down by hand. We emptied every water bottle, plastic container, and even salvaged milk jugs, filling them with the pre-filtered, still cloudy water from the cistern, arranging them under the fierce morning sun. It was agonizingly slow. Hours crawled by. The first drops that seeped through were still tinged with earth, but they were clearer. We repeated the process, pouring the slightly cleaner water through fresh layers. By mid-morning, a collective cheer erupted as the first truly clear, though still warm, water dripped into a collection bucket. It wasn't much, but it was life. We started with the most vulnerable: the infants, the elderly, those in the medical tent. The sight of a child taking a gulp of the precious, sun-purified water, their eyes blinking in surprise, was a greater reward than any official commendation. The crisis wasn't averted with a grand, single gesture, but through sheer grinding, perseverance. We continued the ancient purification process day and night, forming human chains to transport water from the cistern, filter it, and distribute it. It was a brutal, physically demanding existence, but we were fighting back. As for Alara, her fate was complex. Her confession, her backstory, and the revelation of the land's memory keepers shook me to my core. I couldn't simply hand her over to authorities. The optics alone would be devastating for the hub, portraying it as a place of internal strife, not sanctuary. And I felt a strange, uncomfortable flicker of understanding for her pain, if not her methods. Instead, I confronted her with the true cost of her actions, forcing her to witness the suffering she had caused. She saw the dehydrated children, the despairing faces. The rigid conviction in her eyes began to waver, replaced by something akin to horror. I gave her a choice: face the full wrath of the law, or help us, truly help us, restore the balance she had so violently disrupted. She chose the latter. Alara, surprisingly, proved invaluable. Her knowledge of the old land, passed down through her family, revealed other forgotten conduits and underground seepages connected to the cistern, allowing us to increase our initial collection significantly. Her detailed knowledge of the filtration system, from her sabotage attempts, allowed Miguel to devise a strategy to dislodge the resin, albeit slowly and painstakingly. She worked alongside us, silently, her once vengeful eyes now reflecting a quiet shame. I kept her presence discreet, allowing only a few trusted individuals to know her true role. The land's memory keepers' conspiracy, as far as I could ascertain, was a loosely organized group, more about shared grievances and ideological support than coordinated attacks. Ilara's story was a tragic manifestation of their destructive rhetoric, a warning about the unseen forces that can capitalize on historical pain. The immediate relief when the water supply stabilized, albeit through primitive means, was palpable. A collective sigh of relief, then an emotional outpouring unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. People wept, hugged, and murmured thanks. The camp, once a scene of despair, slowly began to breathe again, not with its former chaotic energy, but with a new, quiet determination. We had faced the abyss and pulled back. The long-term aftermath changed everything. My property, once a private sanctuary, became a permanent, if unofficial, community asset. The lessons of the drought and of Ilara's sabotage reshaped my priorities. I invested heavily in sustainable water solutions, converting old barns into massive rainwater harvesting systems and planting drought-resistant crops. The ranch evolved into a self-sustaining hub, not just for disaster relief, but for community resilience. My relationship with the local community deepened profoundly. We had faced death together and survived. There was an unspoken bond, a shared understanding of vulnerability and strength. I became less of an isolated rancher and more of a steward, responsible not just for my land, but for the well-being of those around me. As for Alara, she stayed for a time, working tirelessly, quietly. I saw the slow, painful process of healing in her. Eventually she left, not in anger, but with a silent nod, a flicker of something new in her blue eyes, perhaps a fragile peace. The locket she'd dropped, I later found, opened to reveal a faded, sepia-toned photograph of her great-grandmother, a young woman with eyes strikingly similar to Alara's. It was a haunting reminder of the deep roots of her pain, and the cyclical nature of human suffering and redemption. The scars of that time remain, etched onto the parched land, into the repatched pipes, and onto my own soul. It was a brutal, humbling lesson. Generosity, even with the purest intentions, can uncover unexpected challenges, exposing ancient wounds and hidden resentments. But it also proved the indomitable resilience of the human spirit. We faced the absolute worst, natural disaster compounded by human malice, and found a way to survive, not through advanced technology, but through ancient wisdom, collective effort, and a raw, desperate will to live. The drought may have stolen the water, but it revealed the enduring spring of humanity's strength,